Welcome to the session with Manfred Steyer. Manfred is a trainer and consultant with a focus on Angular. He's a Google developer expert for Angular and a trusted collaborator in the Angular team. Also, he's an author for O'Reilly, Microsoft Press, Hanser, and Java Magazine. And he shares his extensive know-how at the largest regional and international conferences. So it's great to welcome you, Manfred, to our conference today. We know each other for many years and have experienced many events together.
Yeah, totally. It's a pleasure to see you again, Mirko.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's start with your session.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So let's get started. This is all about integration patterns of single page application-based macro frontends. And we will also see some issues that arise there and also some solutions for this with newer generations of frameworks. So what you see here is the high school I attended when I was about 16 years old. And you know, back then in Austria, becoming 16 was an awesome age, because with 16, we have been finally allowed to drive a little tiny moped. And some people chose for a scooter instead. And I still remember in the school class I was there, we discussed a lot, what's the better option? Is it better to have a moped or is it better to have a scooter? And finally, when thinking back about the situation, this discussion was really ridiculous, wasn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, you cannot say what is the better solution in terms of mopeds and scooters, because everything in this world is about consequences in your very situation. And I think the only consequence back then was belonging to this group or belonging to that group. Besides a matter of taste, it was just about belonging to a specific group. However, this really reminds us to the situation in software architecture, where you can also not say, well, this is the best architecture or this is the worst architecture. Also in the world of software architecture, you have to evaluate different candidates against your very situation, your very architectural goals. And this is especially true when we want to go with micro frontends, because micro frontends has a lot of consequences. There are really a lot of consequences. Not all of them are obviously positive ones. Why do we do micro frontends, by the way? Well, the main reason is we want to subdivide a huge frontend into tiny parts that can be developed by individual teams. And so we have little autarkic teams that don't block each other. Or to put it in another way, we get back the agility of small teams, even though we have a huge overall software system. And one other nice benefit of micro frontends is if you put each micro frontend into an own repository, then you can do in your micro frontend what you want. Because the borders between repositories are quite strict borders. You cannot easily grab over those borders and grab into another micro frontend. No, you are completely decoupled. Of course, there is something like Git submodules, but Git submodules don't happen by incident. I've never seen someone saying, oops, now I've created a submodule by incident, don't know what to do. No, something like this does not happen. That means you have your vertical, and within this vertical, you can do your own decisions. You could decide to go with this framework, for instance, or with that framework. This would be completely possible. However, I know a lot of companies saying this would be possible, our architecture would allow it. However, we don't allow it. Our policies don't allow it, because we cannot afford to invest in so many different frameworks. We don't want to have a framework soup. On the other side, such a situation can be beneficial if you need to migrate little by little from an older technology stack to a newer one. And we all know this happens at least once in a while, once in a decade or once in 2 decades. Our technology stack is not always up to date, and sometimes new stuff appears, and so we need to migrate over. If you think what you did 20 years ago, well, I don't think you want to start a new project with those very technologies today. Another reason why you want to do something like this is a merger. Perhaps your company purchased another one, and now you need to bring together several products to one big product suite. Something I see a bit more often is something like this here, when we have different versions of the same framework, because we cannot make all the teams to update on the same point in time. And so perhaps some teams are with the older version and some teams are already with the newer version. And this is also completely possible with micro frontends. So we can do our own decisions, not only architectural wise, but also in terms of our framework or our technologies. And this seems to be nice at first glance. However, this comes with some drawbacks, especially when we talk about single page applications. Because when we talk about single page applications, everything is downloaded into the browser. And my theory is that downloading several versions of the same framework is not necessarily improving your memory footprint. And this is not necessarily improving your startup times. And this might be an issue. Besides this, there are further issues, like no one is officially testing if one framework can coexist with another version of itself in the same browser window. Or if one framework can coexist with another framework in the same browser window. No one will officially test something like this. Well, I can tell you, we can make it work. Sometimes the road is a bit rocky, but we can make it work. At the end of the day, we talk about JavaScript executed in your browser, but there is no official way. And besides this, we might end up with version mismatches. So perhaps we have an issue with some shared libraries in the browser. They might not work with both versions. And if we try to compensate for this by downloading several versions of the library, we are increasing the bundle sizes further. So somehow this is not an ideal situation. And those trade-offs are what I want to talk about today. For this, I have prepared two things. I want to show you some traditional approaches to deal with all those trade-offs. And then I want to show you approaches that use a new wave of frameworks. There are some new nice frameworks out there that bring a lot of nice ideas, and those nice ideas help to implement micro frontends in a better way. Yeah, before we start, let me introduce myself. I am Manfred. I'm a trainer and consultant for Angular, and I'm focusing for Angular in the enterprise environment. I'm quite connected to the Angular community. I live in Austria. I do a lot of stuff in Germany. Actually, since 2008, I'm every second week in Germany, traveling around the federal countries and helping companies with software development. Sometimes I'm also allowed to enter other countries if I promise to behave well. Okay, cool. Let's get started with the first part of this talk. It's about approaches for traditional single-page applications. Well, I think the simplest approach to integrate single-page applications is to go with hyperlinks. It's too simple to be true sometimes. However, it really works well, especially if we talk about a product suite. A product suite like Office 365, where we have one application, and if we want to move over to another application of the suite, we just follow a hyperlink. This works well because most of the times we just use one of those applications. And most of the times we stick with one of those applications for quite a time. So for instance, if I'm writing a new article, I'm sticking with Word for the next 6 hours. If I'm doing the budget for the next year, I'm sticking with Excel for the next 5 months, give or take. And I think this already shows that switching between those applications is not that a burden. However, if we needed to switch between applications time and again, just to accomplish one task, this would be an overhead. This would for sure decrease your user experience. Another integration style is what I'm calling the shell-based integration, which is about implementing an application, a web application. I call it the shell, and this shell is loading further applications on demand. This looks a bit like lazy loading. However, traditional lazy loading in single page application frameworks assumes that everything is known at compile. However, here, when we go with micro frontends, nothing is known at compile time. Everything is separately deployed, everything is separately implemented, and so we can only grab those moving parts at runtime. This is the big difference. We need to load this stuff at runtime into our shell. And for this, there are several options. I know several companies that decided for iframes. They have some characteristics that are not that bad as you might think. Some companies bootstrap several single-page applications in one page, in one index HTML. It's about loading the JavaScript code from additional applications and bootstrapping them in the middle of yours. And some people use something like federation. Module federation, for instance, is quite popular. It is about doing the same. However, it gives you a nice abstraction over all those technical details. By the way, there are also some meta frameworks out there picking up those approaches and bringing some additional conveniences to the play. For instance, one meta framework is the Luigi framework from SAP, and they really use iframes. And they abstract iframes nicely away. It took me quite a time to find out that they are using iframes. By the way, meanwhile, they are also supporting web components a bit, but the original architecture, and this becomes clear once you work with it, was built on top of iframes. Yeah. Perhaps not the most beautiful integration approach, perhaps not the most popular HTML element. However, iframes have some nice characteristics, like you can integrate everything. Even a 20-year-old web application can be integrated via iframes, and you have a great isolation. That means one iframe cannot hack another iframe. That's why this style is already also nowadays used a lot in environments where micro frontends come from different vendors. Of course, if it's possible to go with one of the more modern approaches, it would be better. So let's have a look at bootstrapping several single-page applications. It's basically about adding another tag to your page, and then you add a script tag that loads JavaScript that instantiates another single-page application in this tag. That means you are starting one application inside of another application. You can also do this dynamically with some JavaScript magic. Here I'm creating a first tag, the root tag for my JavaScript application, and I'm appending it to my page. And there I'm creating a script tag that is pointing to my JavaScript bundle, and I'm also adding it to my page. And so after that, the browser will start downloading the JavaScript, and then it will fulfill this tag with live. It will bootstrap my application in there. If you want to load different frameworks or different framework versions, it might be a good idea to abstract the differences of your single-page application frameworks away. Because as a shell, you don't want to know, well, you are Angular, that's why I have to talk with you that way, and you are React, that's why I have to talk with you this way. No, this is nothing you want to know as a shell, and so it would be wise to abstract your different frameworks. And in theory, you could do this with an interface with a start and stop method. If you look in some of those meta frameworks, they are using sometimes such interfaces. An approach I like a bit more is going with web components, because it's a web standard that is meanwhile supported everywhere. IE is not a topic anymore. A lot of frameworks don't support it anymore, and so web components are really supported everywhere. And so we can use this web standard to wrap up our applications and to hide technical details of those applications. Just wrap it up and load it into your browser so that the browser can display those web components containing full applications on demand. Saying this, here we don't talk about a traditional web component in the sense of a widget like a date-time picker. No, this is more of a really coarse-grained web component. However, on a technological level, it's really fine and it works well. Another approach to load something from another application into yours is module federation. It's about doing what we've seen before with loading script tags. However, this works more seamlessly. You can directly import something from over there, from an application you did not even know at compile time. Plus, you can share libraries. You can say, well, the shell that is officially called host here has Angular core, and the micro frontend that is officially called remote here also needs Angular core. And so at runtime, both can decide to just load it once and to share it. There are also some strategies for dealing with version mismatches, like looking at the version number, trying to find out if someone has a higher compatible version, like a higher minor version, or deciding to load two different versions, because perhaps we need two different versions that are not compatible to each other. When we talk about module federation, we need to talk about two flavors. There is an unobtrusive flavor when you just go with one single framework and version. And there is a bit advanced flavor if you need to go with multiple frameworks and versions. If you only have one single framework and one single version, this approach is really beautiful, because in this case, module federation looks to your framework just like lazy loading. Your framework does not even recognize that something special is going on. It just looks like lazy loading, and that means we don't need to tweak your frameworks. We don't need any of those advanced tricks to make micro frontends work in your browser. Your framework does not recognize, but module federation underneath the covers makes sure something is loaded we never saw before. When we talk about multiple frameworks and versions, this is not that streamlined. In this case, we need to bootstrap several single-page applications. We need to load several single-page applications into our page and start all of them. And if we abstract them with web components, as seen before, bootstrapping will happen automatically. Once we add the element to the page, the browser will take care of rendering the component. However, even when we go with multiple frameworks, we can configure module federation to share versions given two or more micro frontends need the same versions. So if we have a group of micro frontends needing the same version of your framework, then we just need to load this version once and then we can share it. And if we have another group of micro frontends that need another version of the same framework, well, then we also load this second version, and then also we share this second version among those groups. So one of the best things about the single framework and version approach is, as mentioned before, we don't need any of those workarounds. With multiple frameworks, we need some workarounds because they are not prepared to coexist with other frameworks in the same browser. We can make this work, but the roads might be a bit more rocky. But if we go down this rocky road, we get the best of both worlds. Because of having web components, we can combine different framework versions or different frameworks. They are hidden nicely behind the web component. And of course, the bundle of choice is also helping a lot here. And because of going with federation, we can share one framework version if two or more applications need this very version. So kind of we get the best of both worlds. And for this, I want to show you a first demonstration. So in this demonstration, I'm going with an Angular 14 application, and I'm loading a first micro frontend. It's a separately compiled and deployed piece of software, and it's seamlessly loaded in here. And as this micro frontend is also using Angular 14, we don't need to download a lot. We just need to download some kilobytes for this additional micro frontend. However, this changes when I'm loading a web component using React. In this case, we need to download React, of course, which is overhead in this case of about 40K, 30 to 40K. And then we need to load the source code of this application. However, as we go with module federation, once we have downloaded React in this version, we can share it. So if we had another application needing React in the same version, we did not need to download React again. We have the same here. I'm loading an Angular application, Angular 12. Here I'm reusing Angular 12. So Angular 12 does not need to be downloaded again. And we have the same here with another application that is also using Angular 12. So all of them are reusing Angular 12. Once we have downloaded it, we just need to download the additional source code for this or that application. Here we have a Vue application. I don't want to disappoint anyone, so I also integrated Vue. And here we have AngularJS, which is considered legacy nowadays. It's the predecessor of Angular. And yeah, meanwhile, you should not use it anymore. However, I think this example shows nicely that micro frontends are also a nice approach to migrate little by little from one stack to another stack. Perhaps if you figure that this micro frontend is not that important, then you might decide to not update it immediately to a newer framework or version. And here we have something I'm calling dashboard from hell. Dashboard from hell, because in order to start this dashboard, we need 1, 2, 3, 4 different frameworks, which is quite an overhead. But I'm showing this on purpose. I'm showing this because such a scenario is requested a lot in the enterprise environment. And I really want to emphasize, yes, you can make it work. However, it has consequences. You need to download all those frameworks. So perhaps another approach you should at least evaluate is thinking about distributing metadata. Metadata that is just picked up by the dashboard, metadata that allows the dashboard to decide how to render this or that tile. In this case, the dashboard does not need to get all those frameworks loaded. Just an idea you could keep in mind. Okay, cool. This was what we can do with traditional single-page application frameworks. And you have seen, yeah, we can make it work, but there are several severe trade-offs. Now, let's have a look into what I'm calling the new wave of frameworks. Funnily, there are several fresh new frameworks currently coming up with a lot of new ideas. And perhaps those frameworks don't have a critical mass. That means we don't have a lot of people using those frameworks out there. But even though they don't have a critical mass, it is interesting to look into them because we can learn from them a lot. But also the traditional framework vendors, people behind Angular and React and Vue, can learn a lot from them, and actually they do. Sometimes they are really incorporating those new ideas into their frameworks. So in general, those frameworks bring up a lot of new ideas. But one new idea I want to talk about here, and that is beneficial for micro frontends, is what people call partial hydration. And finally, at first glance, partial hydration has nothing to do with micro frontends, nothing at all at first glance. But if we think a bit further, we see this can really be a game changer. But let me show you. First of all, if we talk about a classical single page application, a single page application like those we have seen before, we have a strange situation. We need to download some HTML. And after that, we don't see a thing in the browser. White eagle on white background, we see a white browser window. And then we need to load a huge amount of JavaScript. And then we don't see anything meaningful in the browser window because this JavaScript also needs to download some data. And only then we have everything in place so that JavaScript can nicely render your page. And this means FMB, the first meaningful paint, is really postponed a lot. It takes several seconds in a web environment to get your first meaningful paint, the first meaningful data display. If we talk about several seconds, let's say 3 seconds, then this might not be an issue for a business application. If we can work nicely with it afterwards, it's fine. But it's a disaster for a public website. If you want to sell something, if you want to implement a web shop, then page speed is king. Then you really need to make sure everything is fast until people will move away. You know, the internet is full with nice things, videos about cats and so on. They will just move away and will be distracted with some other web page. And they won't buy something on your page. So I think in general, if someone wants to give you money, you have to make it easy for them to give you you their money for them so that they can give you their money. You know what I mean? Yeah, so 3 seconds here is a disaster for a big web application. And this disaster is compensated for years by something those single page applications called server-side rendering. It's not the last word on this. It's about pre-rendering the HTML in the backend. That means we get rich, full, meaningful HTML in the browser. And that means we can immediately see something that provides some value. The first meaningful paint happens earlier. However, at this point in time, the application is just a skeleton. And you need to revive it by loading additional JavaScript. And this takes some time, of course. And that means we have here the special situation that a lot of time passes by between first meaningful paint and time to interactive. And finally, in this time frame, we have the impression the application is already there and interactive. However, it is not interactive. It is just a static web page. That's why some people call this the uncanny valley. Something that is a bit like in a horror film. You think you talk with a real application, however, you just talk with a static application, with an application that is not fully alive. This issue was already described by this article here several years ago. You can see it was updated the last time in 2016. And this article already back then criticized that all those frameworks need to download everything in order to make your application interactive. I think the title is quite fitting. When everything is important, nothing is. Like if the whole JavaScript is so important, you need to download it at once. It is not really important anymore because it is postponing everything. And funnily, I had contact with some framework people back then. They all knew about this issue in 2016. However, in 2016, they did not have a good answer for this. And this is changing now, or at least for some years now, because more and more frameworks introduce something that is called progressive iteration, meaning you download HTML, so you get the first meaningful paint quite quickly, and then you download the JavaScript parts as needed, little by little. And so you also get the time to interactive quite quickly. You can directly interact with your page. You don't have to wait a lot for the whole JavaScript. And the remaining JavaScript parts are just downloaded on demand. When you scroll something into view, or if you start interacting with some parts. And you can further improve this game by using something that's called partial hydration, where you might find out that you don't need to download everything. There are several things that are just there to be rendered once. Several things just need to be executed once in the backend. Rendering a product description just needs to happen in the backend. We don't need the code for it in the front end. We can completely skip it. Yeah, and this, of course, will further improve your page speed. Let me show you a demonstration for all of this. In this demonstration, I have a little flight agency, and this flight agency built its application with Astro, which is one of those new frameworks. And you see, you can decide between a New York trip, New York, and New York. So it's a very small and young travel agency. However, one thing that is really nice, if we now look here at the network tab, let me start it in the private mode to also disable all my browser plugins. If we load it in the if we load it here, and if we look in the network tab, we see that not much is loaded. We just see HTML is loaded and some CSS is loaded, and of course a picture and an icon. But that's it, no JavaScript. And if we move in here to one of those trips to New York, then we also see that not much is downloaded. Perhaps we see here a bit of HTML, perhaps we see some images. However, when scrolling down here, little by little, the source code for those so-called interactive islands, you see the count of requests is going up, is loaded. So let's retry this. We reload the page. And when I'm starting to scroll down, just on demand, the JavaScript is arriving. The JavaScript for the first interactive island, the JavaScript for the second interactive island, the JavaScript for the third interactive island. So just for fun, I implemented the same islands with different frameworks. This is possible because Astro supports all those frameworks out there. However, obviously, you won't do something like this in practice. This is just about showing you can combine Astro with the framework of your choice to implement those interactive islands. Those islands are now really interactive, which is proven by this button here. If I'm clicking here, JavaScript is calculating the price. Multiplying is something JavaScript is really good at. And a little tip, if you are on a budget, book a negative amount of flights and you get some money back. Great. Okay, let's click on checkout. Here we see another page where I can buy some add-ons, extra leg room, for instance, or an additional meal on my flight. And funnily, and I think you did not recognize because it was that fast, this page is implemented with another framework, with the framework Quick. And this is interesting because you have seen, because of just loading HTML, we can quickly navigate back and forth. Just loading a little tiny additional amount of HTML is not a big thing. That means hyperlink integration, the very simple approach of integrating applications, is now viable again. It's not an issue to interlink those applications because they are that fast. When activating them, I just need to load some JavaScript. It's not degrading user performance. By the way, Quick, the framework I used here, has another very interesting characteristic, namely it downloads the components only when I'm starting interacting with them. Look at this. Nothing is downloaded, but when I'm clicking here, when I'm starting to interact with them, a little tiny amount of JavaScript is downloaded. And furthermore, Quick can even subdivide your components in little tiny parts that are downloaded on demand. So we don't even need to download the whole component, but only the fraction we currently need for this very action, for instance, when clicking this or that button. So I think the key takeaway is, with those new approaches that are really fast, hyperlink integration becomes viable again. And hyperlink integration does not degrade your user experience. Okay, cool. Let me come to a conclusion. I think we have seen in the first part of this talk that single page applications in combination with the micro frontend idea come with a lot of trade-offs. Sometimes it's okay-ish, especially in a corporate environment where bundle size does not play a huge role because you have repeating users, they can benefit from the browser cache, and waiting 3 additional seconds in the morning is not a big issue for them. It's differently for customers of a web shop. They don't have that much patience. Yeah, so for business applications, it's okay-ish. If you depend on conversions like in a web shop, then this new wave is really tempting. This new wave of frameworks that give you something meaningful immediately and loads the rest little by little just on demand. And I know it's a bit boring, and we architects repeat this sentence time and again, but it's really true. At the end of the day, you have to evaluate your options, your architectural candidates against your architectural requirements. And there is one last thing I really want you to remember, namely, life is full of trade-offs. You need to evaluate them. Plus, the discussion, scooters versus mopeds, does not make any sense. Don't do it. Okay, so thanks for having me. I've already uploaded my material to my blog. You find it here. And follow me on Twitter to stay in contact. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your brilliant talk, Manfred. I got 2 questions from our audience. First is, what is your favorite modern JavaScript framework?
Well, I'm an Angular guy since years, and so this is my favorite framework. If we look in the newer ones, then I think we can really learn a lot from Quick. It does not have a lot of people that use it, but it comes with a lot of new ideas. And we can also learn a lot from Solid. And funnily, all the existing framework, I often talk about the big 3, namely React, Angular, and Vue, currently try to learn from them and to incorporate their concepts into their frameworks. So it seems like the new fresh frameworks are kind of incubators for fresh ideas. And if they work those ideas, then they will be adopted by other frameworks.
Thank you. Next question. How is the developer experience regarding hot reloading affected? Hot reloading affected?
Yeah, so it's of course a bit affected. And I think this is also one area where we need more experience and more research. because if you think about debugging an application where only a part has been downloaded and another part needs to be downloaded a bit later, this can be quite a challenge. So I think we need a bit more tooling here. It's doable. We are all developers. We know how to deal with bugs and how to hunt down bugs. But yeah, it could be a bit more convenient.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What's the distribution of the shown integration approach in the market, especially enterprises?
Yeah.
Shall I repeat or?
Oh, no,
okay.
no, I got it.
Okay.
So I would say, especially in enterprises, those integration approaches are used a lot. I have a lot of customers in the area of banking or insurances where such approaches are needed, because in those areas you really have huge applications. Also in the area of healthcare. If you think about a hospital information management system, there are so many information that come up for a patient, like X-ray and medication and all the different specialist divisions. And somehow you need to bring all those together for nurses and physicians. And so it's really used a lot in the enterprise. However, if you ask me, if you want to reach the sweet point, then you need to have more than one team. Because if you just have one team, if the application is small enough to be developed by just one team, or perhaps even by a tiny amount of teams, then just working on one monolith might be good enough. However, if there are several people with different knowledge, perhaps people that don't know each other or sit in different locations around the world, then those integration approaches are very tempting.
I got more questions. We have still time. So from the interactivity perspective, it makes more sense to load the GS in the background while the user is looking at the page. Loading it when the user clicks will lead to the degradation in user experience because of unavoidable delay due to loading time.
Yeah, totally. So the good message is most of those frameworks have several strategies baked in. You can say, well, this is very important. This is loaded immediately. This here is loaded once the user does nothing else, once we have free resources in the browser. And you could say, well, this is less important, so let's only load it when we really interact with it. So it's about doing a list with priorities, and you can use different strategies for different parts or areas of this list.
Okay. There's another question. Why did Next NUXT Vue or Next.js React are mentioned as meta frameworks as they only work with a single framework? Why did Vue? Or Next.js React are mentioned as meta frameworks as they only work with a single framework?
I got it. Well, I think it's a bit about how you define meta framework. Is a meta framework something on top of several frameworks like Astro? We have seen there were several islands implemented with different frameworks. Or is a meta framework already something that is built on just one framework to extend it? I think it's just a matter of definition. Several people say already the version with one framework can be a meta framework because we are on a meta level above the existing framework or library and adds additional possibilities.
Okay, the next question here. How does AI affect front-end development?
Interesting question. So it's not directly related to this talk, but I have some past with AI. I'm really into algorithms, and so I'm following those trends. And I think one idea is that we don't need to click around all the time, but perhaps we can just ask the application in a chat window what to do. And perhaps sometimes the application comes up with additional forms or routes like, hey, look, what you want to achieve can be done with this form. Here you have it. Please fill it out. I already filled out some of the fields that were mentioned in your text when we were chatting with each other. So I think this is one of the possibilities we have with AI in the future, chatting with your AI.
Okay, then there is the last question. Do you believe that micro front ends will represent the future of front-end development?
No. I think it will represent a fraction of the future of front-end development. One thing we learned for sure is it's not a solution for everyone. So if you only have one team or a tiny amount of teams, or if you have a piece of software that is written in 3 years and then just in maintenance mode, then all of this might be an overkill. Then perhaps you should focus on other topics that are more important. However, if we really talk about those enterprise scale applications that are developed for decades and where we need to renovate them from the inside out after 7 years, after 10 years, because the technology landscape is changing, then this approach is really tempting. But as always, don't use it if you don't need it. I like to go with the metaphor. Physician does not treat you if you don't have any pains or any issues. They don't give you pills just for fun, and perhaps it's the same situation here.
Okay, thank you. So we had answered all questions, I think. Yes, everything is answered. Thank you, Manfred, for having that we had you here at our conference.